I pulled into the gravel parking lot and cut the engine, checking my gas gauge one more time. Quarter tank left, maybe enough to get back to town if this didn't work out. The job posting I'd found online was vague, just restaurant help wanted, experience preferred but not required. But I wasn't in a position to be picky. The diner looked like it had been fighting a losing battle against the desert for decades. Paint peeled from the exterior walls in long strips, and the neon sign that probably once advertised Miller's Diner in bright letters now blinked weakly. Half the bulbs dead or dying. The building sat alongside Highway 58 like something forgotten, surrounded by nothing but scrub brush and heat waves rising from the asphalt. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the entrance, feeling the desert heat press against my back through my t-shirt. 3 weeks since graduation, 2 weeks since my last shift at the movie theater back home, and my savings account was down to double digits. Mom had made it clear I couldn't live in her basement forever, not without college plans or a real job. This roadside diner outside Barstow wasn't exactly what I'd pictured for my future, but it was something. The door chimed when I pushed it open, and cool air hit my face. The interior was cleaner than I'd expected based on the outside. Red vinyl booths, checkered linoleum floors, and a long counter with chrome stools. Classic diner setup, nothing fancy but functional. The smell of coffee and grease hung in the air, common and oddly comforting. A man was wiping down one of the tables near the window, moving with the efficient motions of someone who'd done the same task thousands of times. He had to be in his 50s, with deep lines carved around his eyes, and the kind of weathered face that came from years of hard work. His hands were thick and calloused, and he didn't look up when I walked in. "Excuse me," I said, walking closer. "I'm Emily Thompson. I called about the job posting." He finished wiping the table before acknowledging me, straightening up slowly and fixing me with a direct look. His eyes were pale blue, set deep in that lined face, and they studied me with an intensity that made me want to check if I had something stuck in my teeth. "Jacob Miller," he said, his voice rougher than I'd expected from our brief phone conversation. "You're the one from the phone." "Yes, sir. I can start whenever you need me to." Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, unfolding it carefully. The paper looked like it had been handled a lot, creased and slightly yellowed with handwriting in blue ink. He held it out to me without explanation. "Memorize these," he said, "tonight." I took the paper and looked down at it. 5 rules were written in neat handwriting, numbered 1 through 5. 1. If a customer orders 3 or more milkshakes, bring the order to me before making them. 2. Do not clean the women's bathroom after 6 p.m. 3. If you seat a group of 4 people and notice a 5th person at the table, move the group to a different location immediately. 4. If a customer asks you to sing happy birthday, politely decline. 5. If a customer orders something not on our menu, tell them it will take 2 hours to prepare. I read through the list twice, waiting for the punchline. When I looked back up, Jacob was watching me with that same serious expression. No hint of humor anywhere on his face. "Is this some kind of initiation thing?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Like hazing for new employees?" Jacob turned back to his table wiping without answering. I followed him as he moved to the next booth, the paper still in my hand. "I mean, the milkshake thing, I guess I understand. Maybe it's a supply issue. But the bathroom cleaning and singing happy birthday?" I trailed off, realizing he wasn't going to respond. Instead, Jacob walked behind the counter and pointed to an old cash drawer, the kind with actual buttons instead of a touch screen. Cash drawers straightforward. Drawer sticks sometimes. You have to give it a firm push. Kitchen pass-through is there. He pointed to a window cut into the wall behind the counter. And the supply closet is in the back hallway. I nodded, tucking the rule paper into my pocket. The whole place felt stuck in time, like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The coffee maker was the kind with glass pots, and the menu boards above the counter were the type with removable letters. "When do I start?" I asked. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. Uniform is black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes. Jacob moved to another table, his cleaning cloth making squeaky sounds against the vinyl. I couldn't help myself. A laugh escaped before I could stop it. Come on, though, seriously. Are those rules for real? The singing thing has to be a joke, right? Jacob stopped what he was doing. The cloth went still in his hand, and he turned to look at me directly. When our eyes met, something in his expression made my smile stop. The rules, he said, his voice completely flat, are not suggestions. The way he said it, dead serious, no warmth, no hint that he was playing along with some elaborate prank, made the air in the diner feel heavier. I found myself taking a half step back. Your life, Jacob continued, not breaking eye contact, will depend on following them exactly. The serious way he said it killed my amusement instantly. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but something about the way he stood there, completely still, completely serious, made the words die. I didn't believe him. Not really. But I stopped smiling. I walked back to my car in silence. Jacob's words repeating in my head. Your life will depend on following them exactly. The way he'd said it, completely serious without a trace of humor, it stuck with me during the entire drive home. I kept pulling the crumpled paper from my pocket at red lights, reading through those 5 bizarre rules again and again. 2 weeks later, I understood why he'd looked so deadly serious. My second shift started like any other Tuesday morning. The breakfast crowd was light, a few truckers, a couple of construction workers grabbing coffee before heading out to some job site. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of the place, the way Jacob moved around the kitchen and dining area with mechanical efficiency, the way he barely spoke unless absolutely necessary. Around 10:30, a family came in. Mom, Dad, and their kid who looked maybe 8 years old. Normal people, normal clothes, normal conversation about whether the kid wanted chocolate chip pancakes or French toast. The kind of customers I'd been serving all week without incident. Then the mom looked up from her menu and smiled at me. Could we get 3 chocolate milkshakes to start? My hand was already reaching for my order pad when the first rule flashed through my mind. If a customer orders 3 or more milkshakes, bring the order to me before making them. I'd remembered all 5 rules like Jacob had demanded, reading them over so many times I could recite them backward. Sure thing, I said, scribbling down the order. I'll get those started for you. I walked to the kitchen pass-through where Jacob was flipping eggs on the grill. The morning heat was already building outside and sweat beaded on his forehead. Table 4 wants 3 chocolate milkshakes, I said, holding out the order slip. Jacob's spatula stopped moving. He turned to look at me, then at the slip of paper, then back toward table 4. His jaw got tight in a way I'd never seen before. Wait here, he said. Jacob wiped his hands on his apron and walked out from behind the counter. I watched him approach the family's table, moving with that same careful efficiency he brought to everything. He didn't speak to them directly, just stood a few feet away, studying them with those pale blue eyes. The family didn't seem to notice him at first. The kid was coloring on his placemat with crayons from the little cup we kept on each table, and the parents were discussing what to order for their entrees. Normal family behavior. Nothing that should have made Jacob's shoulders go stiff like that. He came back to the kitchen after maybe 30 seconds, his face completely blank. Machine's broken, he told me. Tell them we can't make milkshakes today. I stared at him. The milkshake machine had been working fine an hour ago when I'd cleaned it during opening procedures. I'd watched Jacob test it himself, going through the motions like he did every morning. But machine's broken, Jacob repeated, his voice flat and final. I went back to table 4, feeling confused, but not wanting to argue with my boss during my second week. I'm sorry, but our milkshake machine isn't working today. Can I get you something else to drink? The mother blinked at me. For just a second, Something passed across her face. Disappointment, maybe. Or something deeper. Then she smiled again. That same pleasant expression from before. "Oh, that's fine. We'll just take the check, please." They hadn't ordered anything else, hadn't even touched the water glasses I'd brought them. The family stood up, left a $5 bill on the table, and walked out without another word. The kid dropped his crayons on the floor and left them there. I was still standing by their empty table when I heard the sound of liquid hitting metal. Jacob was behind the counter, pouring 3 fresh chocolate milkshakes down the drain. The ice cream and milk swirled together before disappearing into the pipes, and he rinsed the blender cup with hot water until no trace remained. The milkshake machine buzzed quietly, working perfectly. Later that week, things got stranger. It was Thursday afternoon, the kind of dead period between lunch and dinner where the diner felt empty and too quiet. I was refilling salt shakers when a man in a rumpled business suit slid into the corner booth. He had the look of someone who'd been driving too long, stubble, wrinkled clothes, that slightly dazed expression that came with too much highway and not enough sleep. I brought him a menu and a glass of water, going through the routine I'd developed over the past 2 weeks. He barely looked at the menu before looking up at me with bloodshot eyes. "I'd like the dessert special, please." I paused with my pen hovering over the order pad. The dessert special. I'd read through our menu dozens of times by now, knew every item and price by heart. We didn't have anything called a dessert special. Rule 5 came back to me. If a customer orders something not on our menu, tell them it will take 2 hours to prepare. The dessert special will take about 2 hours to prepare, I said, keeping my voice level and professional. Would you like to wait, or can I suggest something else? The man nodded slowly, like he'd expected this response. I'll wait. He didn't ask what was in the dessert special, didn't ask about the price, or whether he could get something to drink while he waited. Just folded his hands on the table and settled back into the booth like he planned to sit there for the full 2 hours. I walked back to the kitchen where Jacob was prepping vegetables for the dinner crowd. When I told him about the dessert special order, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might be having some kind of medical episode. 2 hours? He asked. That's what the rule says. Jacob disappeared into the back room without explanation. I heard cabinets opening and closing, the sound of boxes being moved around. 20 minutes passed. The business suit man sat in his booth without moving, staring at nothing, his hands still folded in exactly the same position. When Jacob finally came back, his shirt was damp with sweat, and his hands had the slightest shake. He walked directly to the corner booth and stopped in front of the customer. "We're out of the ingredients for the dessert special," Jacob said. "I can offer you a burger instead, on the house." The man looked up at him for a long moment. Then he slid out of the booth, dropped a $20 bill on the table, and walked out the front door. He didn't take the change, didn't say goodbye, just went. And the bell above the door rang once as it swung shut behind him. Jacob stood by the empty booth for several minutes after the man went, staring at the $20 bill like it might explode. Finally, he picked it up and carried it to the cash register, moving like each step took a lot of effort. "What just happened?" I asked him. Jacob shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "Stick to the rules. No matter what. No exceptions." That was all he'd say about it. I started keeping the rule list in my pocket after that, checking it multiple times during every shift. The paper grew soft and creased from constant handling, the blue ink slightly smudged from my fingertips. 5 simple rules that somehow had the power to make Jacob's face go white, to send normal-looking customers walking out the door without explanation. The incidents were small, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. A couple would come in, and one of them would buzz something under their breath, and Jacob would appear at their table within seconds, refilling their coffee cups and making conversation until the buzzing stopped. A group of teenagers would pile into a booth, and Jacob would count them twice before relaxing. A woman would ask me about the daily specials, and when I listed them off, she'd nod and say she'd heard we had other options too, and I'd recite Rule 5 like scripture. Each time, Jacob's reaction was the same. Tension that made his movements sharp and careful, followed by visible relief once the situation worked itself out according to the rules. His hands would shake sometimes after these encounters, just slightly, and he'd spend extra time wiping down surfaces that were already clean. I didn't believe in ghosts or monsters or whatever Jacob was so afraid of, but I believed in his fear. The way his breathing changed when certain customers walked in, the way he'd position himself between me and anyone who triggered one of the rules. That was real, even if I didn't understand it. Something was wrong with this place. The rules weren't a joke or an initiation ritual. They were instructions for survival, written by someone who'd learned them the hard way. I just didn't know what we were surviving. 3 weeks into the job, I'd gotten used to the rhythm of lunch service. The diner filled up around noon with construction workers, truckers grabbing a quick bite, and the occasional family passing through on their way to somewhere else. I'd learned to move efficiently between tables, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups without thinking about it. The rule list stayed folded in my pocket, creased from constant handling. I'd catch myself patting it through the fabric during quiet moments, making sure it was still there. Jacob had been right about memorizing it. I could recite all 5 rules word for word by now, though I still didn't understand why most of them mattered. Around 12:30, a family walked through the front door. Mom, Dad, and 2 teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Standard road trip family, the kind we saw 3 or 4 times a day. The parents were looking around the dining room while the kids stood behind them, both staring at their phones. "Just the 4 of you?" I asked, grabbing menus from the counter. "Yes, please," the mother said, smiling the tired smile of someone who'd been driving for hours. I led them to a booth in the middle section, the one with good lighting and a view of the highway. They slid in. Parents on one side, teenagers on the other, and I was setting down the menus when something moved at the edge of my vision. There was definitely a 5th person at the table. I could sense them sitting between the 2 teenagers, taking up space that should have been empty. My brain processed the presence without question, the same way it might register someone walking behind me or standing in a doorway. But when I turned my head to look directly at the spot, I saw nothing but empty booth cushion between the kids. I blinked hard and looked again. For just a moment, I could make out an outline, see-through and wrong somehow, like heat waves, but with a roughly human shape. Then it was gone, leaving only the 2 teenagers who were still busy with their phones. Rule 3 hit me. If you seat a group of 4 people and notice a 5th person at the table, move the group to a different location immediately. "I'm so sorry," I said, putting on my best apologetic smile. "I just realized there's a spill at this table that I need to clean up. Would you mind waiting by the entrance for just a minute while I take care of it?" The father looked confused. "I don't see any—" "It's under the table," I said quickly. "Health department thing. I promise it'll just take a second." They looked at each other but stood up anyway, collecting their things with the tired patience of people who'd dealt with restaurant delays before. I watched them walk back to the entrance, then went straight for the kitchen. Jacob was restocking napkin dispensers near the pass-through window, his movements as methodical as always. I walked up close enough to whisper. "The family I just seated," I said quietly. "There's a 5th person at their table." Jacob's shoulders went rigid. The napkin dispenser in his hand stopped moving, and his knuckles turned white around the plastic edges. He set it down carefully and turned to look at me, those pale blue eyes sharp with the kind of focus I'd learned to recognize during rule situations. "You're sure?" I could see them out of the corner of my eye. When I looked straight at the spot, nothing. But they're there. Jacob nodded once and walked past me into the dining room. I followed a few steps behind, watching as he came up to the waiting family. He didn't speak to them directly, just stood about 6 feet away, looking at their booth with the same focus he'd shown during the milkshake incident. His jaw got tight as he stared at the empty table. Whatever he was seeing or sensing, it was backing up what I'd reported. After maybe 30 seconds, he walked back to where I was standing. "Corner booth," he said quietly. "The one by the window." I nodded and went to the family with another apologetic smile. "All cleaned up. I've got a nice table for you over here with a better view." The corner booth was away from the other tables, positioned so Jacob could keep an eye on it from behind the counter. I seated them again, this time paying closer attention to the space around the table. The feeling was different here. Lighter somehow, like whatever had been following them couldn't settle in the new location. Throughout their meal, I found myself looking at their table more often than usual. Most of the time, it looked completely normal. Family of 4 eating burgers and fries, parents trying to engage their teenagers in conversation about the scenery they'd seen on the drive. But occasionally, just at the edge of my vision, I'd catch a glimpse of that 5th figure. Never when I was looking directly, always in my peripheral view, like a shadow that moved independently of anything casting it. The teenagers seemed restless in ways that had nothing to do with boredom. They kept changing positions, the girl rubbing her arms like she was cold even though the diner was warm. The boy kept looking over his shoulder at the empty space beside him, quick looks that suggested he was reacting to something I couldn't quite see. The parents finished eating first, discussing their route for the rest of the day while the kids picked at their fries. Normal conversation, normal family dynamics, except for the way the mother's eyes would dart to the empty space between her children every few minutes. When they finally asked for the check, I felt a strange sense of relief. They paid in cash, left a decent tip, and filed out the front door with the same tired politeness they'd shown when they arrived. The bell chimed as the door closed behind them, and suddenly the diner felt different. Cleaner, somehow, like the air pressure had changed. Jacob came out from behind the counter before I could even start clearing their table. He went to the corner booth carefully, examining the seats and table surface like he was looking for evidence of something. His hands moved systematically over the vinyl cushions and laminate tabletop, checking every inch. He found nothing unusual, but when he started wiping down the table with his cleaning cloth, his hands were shaking. Not dramatically, just the slightest tremor that made the cloth move unevenly across the surface. I'd seen this reaction before, after the milkshake family and the business suit man, but it still bothered me. "What just happened?" I asked, moving closer to the booth. "What was that thing?" Jacob continued wiping the already clean table, his movements becoming more forceful as he scrubbed at invisible stains. The vinyl squeaked under the pressure of his cloth, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Jacob," I said, louder this time. "I need to know what I'm dealing with here." He stopped cleaning, but didn't look up at me. His hands rested on the table, knuckles still white around the cloth. "Some customers," he said finally, his voice quiet and measured, "bring things with them that don't belong in the restaurant." That was all he would say about it. No matter how many questions I asked, how many different ways I tried to approach the subject, Jacob went back to his restocking and cleaning routine like nothing had happened. But for the rest of the shift, he kept looking at the corner booth, and I caught him counting customers whenever new groups came in. I spent the drive home thinking about what I'd seen out of the corner of my eye in those see-through shapes, about the way the teenagers had acted like something was bothering them without knowing what. The rule list felt different in my pocket now that I knew I'd just experienced something that didn't make any sense. But I'd followed the rule exactly as written, and whatever that thing was, it hadn't been able to stay in the corner booth the way it had at the first table. The rule had worked, even if I didn't understand how or why. That night, I looked through all 5 rules again before bed, paying special attention to the 3rd one. If you seat a group of 4 people and notice a 5th person at the table, move the group to a different location immediately. Simple, direct instructions that had somehow protected both the family and me from something I couldn't even properly see. The dinner rush had been really bad that Friday, and I was running behind on my closing duties. 3 days had passed since the family with the extra person, and I'd gone back to my routine of watching for signs, checking my pocket for the rule list, and trusting Jacob's silent watch. I was wiping down the last table when I noticed the women's bathroom still needed attention. Someone had tracked mud across the floor during the dinner crowd, and there were paper towels scattered around the sinks. I grabbed the cleaning supplies from under the counter, my mind focused entirely on finishing the checklist so I could get home before 9. The bathroom door swung open under my push, and I stepped inside with my arms full of spray bottles and paper towels. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting everything in that harsh white light that made even clean bathrooms look dirty. I set my supplies on the counter next to the sinks and was reaching for the paper towel dispenser when I heard it. Soft laughter coming from the far stall. The sound made me freeze with my hand still extended toward the dispenser. It was too high-pitched, like a child's giggle, but constant and rhythmic. Not the natural rise and fall of someone actually laughing, more like a recording stuck on repeat, the same 3-second loop playing over and over. I should have left. Every instinct I developed over the past 3 weeks was screaming at me to back out of that bathroom immediately. But curiosity overrode caution, and I found myself taking a step closer to the sound instead of toward the door. The laughter continued, mechanical and wrong, bouncing off the tile walls. I could see the far stall door was slightly open, maybe 6 inches of gap showing the interior. Through that gap, I could make out someone sitting on the toilet seat, but something about their posture was off. I took another step forward, cleaning supplies forgotten on the counter behind me. The laughter never changed pitch or rhythm, never paused for breath. Just that same high, tinkling sound repeating endlessly. Another step brought me close enough to see through the gap more clearly, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The person sitting in the stall had a head that was far too large for its body, tilted at an angle that should have broken its neck. The skin was pale, almost see-through, stretched tight over bones that seemed to jut out in all the wrong places. But it was the face that made me understand why Jacob had looked so serious when he'd handed me those rules. The mouth, stretched across nearly the entire width of the head, pulled into a grin that showed too many teeth. They weren't human teeth. They were sharp and uneven, like broken glass arranged in rows. The laughter was pouring out of that impossible mouth without pause, without breath, without any sign of life behind it. Where eyes should have been, there were only empty black sockets that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light instead of reflecting it. The thing was staring directly at me through those hollow spaces, and I realized with horror that it had known I was there the entire time. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I stood paralyzed in the middle of that bathroom, staring at something that couldn't exist, while it stared back at me with those empty sockets. Neither of us moved for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it jumped forward. The thing launched itself toward the stall door with impossible speed, its oversized head leading the charge, and that horrible grin stretched even wider. I stumbled backward, my feet sliding on the tile floor, but I wasn't going to make it to the exit in time. The bathroom door exploded inward, slamming against the wall with enough force to crack the tiles. Jacob burst through the opening and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave bruises. He yanked me toward the door with strength I didn't know he had, and I heard something crash into the stall door behind us just as we cleared the doorway. Jacob slammed the bathroom door shut and stood in front of it, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a marathon. His face was pale and slick with sweat, and his hands were shaking worse than I'd ever seen them. "What time is it?" he asked, his voice rough. I checked my watch with trembling fingers. 6:15. Jacob closed his eyes and leaned back against the bathroom door. Rule 2. Don't clean the women's bathroom after 6 p.m. The rule. I'd memorized it weeks ago, recited it dozens of times, but in my focus on finishing the closing duties quickly, I'd completely forgotten to check the time. I realized I'd walked directly into a situation the rules had been designed to prevent. That was exactly why the rules exist, Jacob said, opening his eyes to look at me. His face had aged 10 years in the past few minutes. Not suggestions, not guidelines. They're the only thing standing between us and what just happened to you. I was still shaking, adrenaline making my whole body feel loose and disconnected. What was that thing? Jacob pushed away from the bathroom door and walked toward the counter, his movements unsteady. He gripped the edge with both hands, knuckles white against the chrome trim. The restaurant sits on something old and wrong, he said, not looking at me. I don't know what it is exactly. Some kind of thin spot maybe, or a door that was never properly closed. These entities have been testing the boundaries for years, looking for ways in. He turned to face me, and I could see tiredness in every line of his worn face. Following the rules keeps them contained. Break the rules and they get stronger. Give them enough chances and they'll find a way to stay. What he was saying started making sense. Every strange thing over the past 3 weeks, the milkshake family, the man who ordered off the menu, the group with the extra person, they hadn't been random events. They were tests, attempts by something not human to find cracks in whatever protection the rules provided. How long have you been dealing with this? I asked. 15 years, Jacob said quietly. Since I bought this place from the previous owner. He gave me the same list of rules, told me to follow them exactly, and then left town the next day. I thought he was crazy until the first time I broke one. Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, older and more worn than mine. The blue ink faded to gray in places. I've added to the list over the years, learned new rules the hard way. The 5 you have are the most important ones, the ones that keep the worst things out. I thought about the thing in the bathroom, the way it had known I was there, the way it had waited for me to get close enough before showing itself. It was watching me. They're always watching, Jacob said, looking for mistakes, for moments when we let our guard down. That's why I told you your life would depend on following the rules. I meant it literally. The bathroom door stayed closed for the rest of the night. Jacob finished the cleaning routine himself while I sat at the counter, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Neither of us spoke much after his explanation, but the silence felt different now, heavier, loaded with shared knowledge of what was really happening in this place. When we finally locked up and walked to our cars, Jacob stopped me before I could get in my driver's seat. "Emily," he said, "you did good today. You remembered to move that family with the extra person. You've been following the rules. What happened tonight doesn't change that." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. I'd made a potentially fatal mistake, and only Jacob's quick thinking had saved me from whatever that thing in the bathroom would have done. "But now you know," Jacob continued. "This isn't a normal job. If you want to quit, I'll understand. No hard feelings." I looked back at the diner, dark except for the security lights Jacob had put up around the outside. From here, it looked like any other roadside restaurant. Weathered, nothing special, the kind of place travelers passed without a second thought. But I knew better now. I knew what lived in the spaces between normal and wrong, testing the boundaries that kept it contained. "I'm not quitting," I said. Jacob studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. We'll talk more tomorrow about the other things you need to watch for, things that aren't in the rules yet." I drove home that night with the rule list pressed flat against my steering wheel, reading it at every red light. 5 simple statements that had just saved my life, written in blue ink by someone who'd learned them through experience. I was only beginning to understand. The next morning, I would show up for my shift with new respect for those rules and the man who'd taught me to follow them. But that night, I went to sleep knowing that some boundaries were there for reasons that went far deeper than workplace policy. They were there because breaking them meant facing things that shouldn't be real at all. I could tell the customer at table 6 was going to be a problem before he even opened the menu. Something about the way he held his coffee cup. Too still. Fingers positioned like he was gripping it for support rather than warmth. His voice had that hollow quality I'd learned to recognize, each word dropping into the air without resonance, like sound coming through a tunnel. More than a year of working at Miller's Diner had taught me to spot the signs early. The subtle wrongness always announced itself if you knew what to look for, and I'd gotten very good at looking. The man set down his coffee and caught my attention with a small wave. I walked over to his table, my hand automatically checking my shirt pocket where the rule list lived, soft and worn from constant handling. "I'd like to order the traveler's meal," he said, his hollow voice confirming my suspicions. "Not on our menu." Rule 5 kicked in immediately. If a customer orders something not on the menu, tell them it will take 2 hours to prepare. I delivered this response dozens of times over the past year, watching as various customers reacted with everything from mild disappointment to that particular stillness that meant something was testing our boundaries. "That will take about 2 hours to prepare," I said, maintaining eye contact. "Would you like to see our regular menu instead?" The man's face showed no emotion, but something moved behind his eyes, a flash of movement that reminded me of heat waves rising from asphalt. He nodded once and asked for the check without ordering anything else, leaving exact change on the table before walking out. I cleared his table carefully, wiping down surfaces that didn't need cleaning while my pulse went back to normal. The stress response never fully went away, even after all this time. I just learned to manage it better, developed techniques for staying calm when supernatural incidents happened during busy shifts. Jacob came out from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee, his movements as smooth as always. He refilled the coffee station without comment, but I caught him looking at table 6 with that focused attention I recognized. He'd sensed the wrongness too, probably before I'd even taken the order. "Traveler's meal?" he asked quietly. "Already gone," I said, stacking the cleaned dishes. "Left exact change." Jacob nodded and went back to his tasks. These brief exchanges had become our standard communication method for rule situations. Minimal words, maximum understanding. We developed an efficient system over the months, built on shared knowledge of how to handle the various entities that tested our defenses. The lunch crowd started filtering in around noon, families and truckers mixing with local workers grabbing quick meals. I moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling drinks and taking orders while keeping part of my attention tuned to the subtle signs that came before supernatural incidents. Most days passed without any rule violations, but you couldn't afford to relax. The moment you stopped watching was exactly when something would slip through. A group of 3 teenagers chose the booth near the window, their conversation focused on plans for the weekend. Normal customers with normal energy, the kind who made the job feel almost ordinary. I was taking their order when another family entered, parents and 2 young kids who looked tired from traveling. "Just the 4 of you?" I asked, grabbing menus from the counter. "Yes," the mother replied, bouncing a fussy toddler on her hip. I led them to a center booth and started setting down menus when the familiar sensation hit me. Something was wrong with the space around their table, an extra presence that made the air feel heavier. Not visible when I looked directly, but unmistakably there in my peripheral vision. Rule 3. I'd handled this exact situation at least 6 times over the past year, and the process had become routine. Move the group immediately. Don't explain the real reason. Maintain normal customer service while implementing supernatural containment. "I'm sorry, but this table has a maintenance issue," I said smoothly. "Let me get you settled over here instead." I guided them to the corner booth, the same isolated table Jacob and I had learned worked best for containing whatever followed groups with extra people. The family settled in without complaint, their children immediately grabbing crayons from the container on the table. The rest of their meal went normally, though I caught occasional glimpses of the 5th presence hovering near their table. The children seemed slightly restless, the younger one rubbing his arms like he was cold, but nothing got worse beyond the usual signs. When they finished eating and left, the heavy feeling lifted immediately. Jacob appeared beside me as I was clearing their table, his cleaning cloth already in hand. He wiped down surfaces with the same careful attention he'd shown since my first day, checking every inch for traces of whatever had attached itself to that family. His hands stayed steady now. The shaking that used to follow Rule incidents had faded as he'd watched me prove I could handle these situations well. "Getting easier?" he asked, continuing to clean. "Different," I said. "Not easier, just familiar." That was the truth. The supernatural encounters never stopped being uncomfortable, but I'd developed systems for managing the stress and staying focused during incidents. Deep breathing techniques, mental checklists, ways of staying grounded when reality became unreliable. Some nights were definitely harder than others, especially when multiple Rule situations happened during one shift. But I'd found a strange sense of purpose in the work. Protecting customers and keeping up the barriers the Rules created had become more than just a job. It was something I was genuinely good at, something that mattered in ways most people would never understand. The afternoon shift brought its usual mix of coffee drinkers and late lunch customers. I focused my attention on each new arrival, looking at their behavior and energy for signs of something wrong. A businessman who ordered normally and paid with exact change. A couple sharing a piece of pie who laughed at each other's stories with genuine warmth. Two construction workers debating the merits of different pickup truck models. All normal. All safe. I was refilling sugar dispensers when I noticed a new waitress struggling with her first week at the truck stop down Highway 58. She'd come in during her break looking frazzled and asking questions about dealing with difficult customers. I recognized the expression, the same overwhelmed confusion I'd worn during my early days here. "You get used to the weird ones," I told her, pouring coffee. "Every place has its regulars with strange habits. You just learn to roll with it." She nodded gratefully and left a $1 tip on coffee that cost 90 cents. After she'd gone, I found myself thinking about the two employees I'd trained over the past year. Both had gone through the same progression from disbelief to acceptance, watching me demonstrate how to handle Rule situations until they understood the importance of following them exactly. Neither had experienced anything as dramatic as my bathroom encounter. I'd made sure of that, checking the time obsessively after 6 p.m. and steering new employees away from potential mistakes. The desert heat pressed against the diner's windows as the afternoon stretched toward evening. I checked my watch, 4:30, and felt worried about closing time getting closer. Evening shifts required extra vigilance, especially after 6 when certain areas became completely off limits. A trucker at the counter asked for a coffee refill and complimented the pie selection. A family finished their meal and left a coloring book behind for the next children who might need entertainment. Small, normal moments that reminded me why the work mattered. These people deserve to eat their meals in safety, to pass through our section of highway without encountering things that shouldn't exist. The Rules made that possible. Jacob's knowledge and experience, combined with careful adherence to boundaries that had been tested and proven over years, created a space where normal life could continue undisturbed, as long as we never forgot what we were really protecting against. I folded my cleaning cloth and checked the time again. 4:45. Still over an hour before the bathroom became dangerous, but I'd learned to track time carefully. Vigilance was easier when it became routine, when checking your watch was as automatic as breathing. The late afternoon crowd began filtering in, and I prepared for another few hours of watching, waiting, and maintaining the careful balance between normal restaurant service and supernatural containment. Some people might find the constant alertness exhausting, but I'd discovered something unexpected in the work. I was good at it, better than good. I was exactly where I belonged.